Hi, my name is Gary Stewart, and I'm the founder and CEO of FounderTribes. And thank you so much for joining us at this Black History Month event, where we're going to talk a bit about whether or not entrepreneurship really is the best way of achieving intergenerational wealth among minority communities. And so I'm really excited that you've joined us. We, I think, have more than 206 people that have signed up. That's awesome. But I'm really excited that you guys have decided to join us for three different reasons. The first is that it's Black History Month, and it's always great to see not only how far we kind of have left to go, but also how far we've come to be able to celebrate that and to use our collective brain power to figure out how we can work together to get to the next level, just as we've done in the case of FounderTribes at various of our partners that we'll introduce later. Secondly, related to that last point, it's always wonderful to celebrate and learn from the achievements of some amazing people, especially amazing Black women like the folks that are on our panel, like Danielle, Connie, Vanessa, and Eleanor. Each of them is a trailblazer and an entrepreneur in her own right, and I'm super excited to hear their discussion. And then lastly, because this is an opportunity for us to celebrate the launch of FounderTribes, a startup that I created about a year and a few months ago. And we're launching now in the US, again, with these three partners: Silicon Valley Bank, represented here by Vanessa; the Association for Enterprise Opportunity, or AEO, represented by Connie; and Howard Law School, represented by Danielle. And of course, we have the ever brilliant Eleanor Brown with us, one of my mentors from way back when I was a student at Yale Law School, here to share some of her brilliance and her insights with us as well. So part of what we're doing with this launch is we're kind of putting it out there, this app, to the world. I'm going to explain it a little bit. If Petar, the presentation, tell me when you're ready for that. We're still an early stage startup, so this means that we know that the product still isn't 100% perfect. It's still in its beta phase, still has some bugs, and we'll still have to iterate until we get better and better versions. It took Facebook 10 years to become Facebook. So we know we're just at the beginning of the journey. But what we'd really love is for all of you guys to download the app, send us feedback, share the app with any other founder that you know, or you might know, that is having any sort of a difficult time in terms of being a founder and needs some support or some mentorship or some ability or some help in terms of trying to figure out how to navigate the whole fundraising cycle. And again, fundraising for us doesn't mean, venture capital. It means any sort of access to capital. So I have the presentation. Let me just go through it a little bit with you guys so you can see what exactly we are doing with FounderTribes. And then we're going to have a video that I can share with you as well. So let me see if I can get to the next slide. Yep. So a little bit about me. I'm an exited serial entrepreneur. My background is I am a Jamaican immigrant. So born in Jamaica, immigrated to the Bronx, New York when I was about 5 or 6 years old. Eventually went to Yale College, Yale Law School, graduated magna cum laude, Phi Beta Kappa. That was where I met actually Danielle when we created an organization together. And then after law school, I eventually practiced law for a few years, but then became an entrepreneur in Spain, raised some money from venture capitalists, and then kind of eventually sold a company. Along the way after that, I became an investor for a corporate venture capital fund where I invested money in early stage companies, and eventually the portfolio became a $1.5 billion startup portfolio. Then along the way, I've also taught at business schools like IE Business School, and most recently as a visiting lecturer at Yale Law School teaching entrepreneurship. I've written in Forbes, and in general, I've kind of just seen a lot of different ways in which entrepreneurship is just a really painful experience for founders. And I've decided that I want to try and fix that. And the reality is that there are hundreds of millions of failing founders globally. And these are people like Anthony, who may be the founder of a telemedicine startup. He's based somewhere outside of kind of the major metropolises for entrepreneurship. So that means outside of probably Boston or New York or San Francisco. And he needs money, but he keeps getting rejected. Or it can be people like Christina. She has a beauty salon. She lives in Brooklyn. She's the first person to graduate from her family. She doesn't feel like she has anyone to talk to. Her friends and family don't really know that much about entrepreneurship. And they're not really accelerators or programs designed for people like her. And the reality is then that when we start to look at how successful people are in entrepreneurship, we generally tend to see about a 90% failure rate. That means that if you look just to the United States in 2020, there were 4.4 million businesses created. 4 million of those businesses are likely going to fail. That's a lot of failure. But the reality is that for founders like Christine and Anthony, it's going to be even worse. Because if you don't look like everyone else, it tends, at least the people who have the money, then it tends to be more difficult to raise the funding. So when we look, for example, to gender, we see that even though women are about 51% of the population, they receive about 2.4% of venture capital funding. And I'm just using venture capital as a proxy for funding more generally. And that this is actually going down. So despite all of the Me Too movement and stuff like that, the amount of money that's being allocated to female founders is actually going down way below their percentage in the population. For Black and Latino or Latinx founders, we represent about 33% of the population in the United States, but only get about 2.6% of the funding. If you don't live in the kind of quote unquote right cities, like I mentioned before, it's highly unlikely that you're going to get funding because they're, again, centered in very particular locations like San Francisco, New York City, or Boston. And finally, if you didn't go to the quote unquote right school, then it becomes more difficult as well because 48% of all venture capitalists went to three schools, Harvard, Stanford, or Yale. And even though their alumni only represent 0.5% of all workers in the US, again, they're 48% of all VCs. So they determine who actually is going to get funded, and they generally tend to fund people that look like them. So our vision is to create an end-to-end, inclusive, scalable platform that empowers founders like Christine and Anthony by giving them access to education, networks, and funding. The idea is if lawyers have law school and if doctors aren't told to fake it till they make it, they're actually instructed and taught how to actually be good doctors, why shouldn't entrepreneurs also have tools that help them to become better entrepreneurs? And that's why we created FounderTribes. So how does it work? Really simple. A founder uploads a pitch. They receive a kind of fundability score, so they can be told really quickly, where they're kind of making mistakes and where they can kind of improve. And then if it turns out that they're already kind of good to go, then we match them with investors or with funding sources based on their stage, the industry that they're in, and any sort of an affinity to different sorts of investment sources. And if they're not quite ready for prime time, then we match them to mentors and also to educational sources to upskill in the areas where they may have some need for help. And behind it all is a really simple insight, which is that there are loads of people out there saying that they want to help entrepreneurs, whether these are grants, accelerators, angels, VCs, banks, corporates. But it's really hard for a founder to know exactly where to go, when to go, and how to reach the right person. And so the insight that we have is really simple. If these days you can find your partner using a dating app, why can't you find the right partner for your business using a matching app as well, which is essentially what FounderTribes is. And we actually take it one step farther by saying that at the end of the day, this is really about making sure that we create platforms that are inclusive from the beginning. We know, for example, that if you go to the same university as someone, you're about 34.4% more likely to want to work with them. And if you belong to the same race on top of that, then you're about 39.2% on top of the 34.4% to want to work with them as well. So why don't we just try to figure out who has what in common with whom? 6 degrees of separation, but all done through an app. So you no longer need to know someone beforehand in order to work with them. You just have to have something in common with them. And again, all of that's really easy to kind of detect and to graph using an app, similar to what dating sites do. And the goal eventually is to kind of rethink the way that platforms like LinkedIn connect us, which is essentially a passive platform, meaning that you have to go in there and you have to kind of try and search for people. Why can't it be more like a Trulia or a Zillow or a dating app that once I fill out my profile or what I'm looking for, I can start to get matches being sent to me all the time based on the probability that there's going to be a kind of connection or match. And also, why does it have to be closed? Why do I need to know the person's email address beforehand? Why can't it just be someone that I went to the same school with and that's all I need to basically be able to kind of unlock that network? And we're starting at the beginning by focusing on underrepresented founders in the United States, because when you add together women, minorities, and working class whites that we also think it's important to focus on, that's 92% of the US population. So 92% of the US population fits into one of these three buckets, but they get less than 10% of the funding. And the goal is after that to focus on more founders, all founders, and then everyone that's ever had any aspiration to be an entrepreneur. So maybe they don't have the idea launched yet, but they just have the aspiration. And then finally, anyone in any kind of business context. And our team so far is pretty impressive. Besides me, there's also Mac, who's our CTO, who used to help J.K. Rowling of Harry Potter fame with all of her digital needs. And then Buyin, who is a PhD from Cambridge University. And then we also have a really great advisory board, people like Jen Wong, who's the CEO of Reddit, another Yale classmate, Amanda Thirsk, who used to work for a member of the royal family, running his office focusing on entrepreneurs, and a lot of really other wonderful people. Again, a lot of Yaleys there as well. Linda Rottenberg, the co-founder and CEO of Endeavor, as well as various professors from Oxford and Yale, like Vincent and Yadin. And we've also raised quite a bit of money, more than $1 million, closer to $1.5 million at this point, from investors, including people like Connie at AEO, but then also, and Danielle as well from Howard, but then also including people like Wafik Saeed, the billionaire benefactor of Oxford Said Business School, Jamie Broderick, who used to run UBS's wealth management unit, and then Chris and Oriol, who are both kind of partners in venture capital funds, as well as people like from Velocity and Gangels, different organizations that support us, and various Silicon Valley unicorn founders like Sandra Daniels, the co-founder of Thumbtack, which is now valued about $3.2 billion. He created that after leaving Yale Law School. And Zach, another Yale Law School graduate, who created a company called OpenGov that's now raised more than $128 million from Andreessen Horowitz. And so here I kind of want to show you a little bit of a video of our vision. I don't know, Petar, if you'd be able to share that video.
We live in a world where 99.9% of the world's 600 million entrepreneurs are treated like roadkill. They might not be from the right race, or they might not be from the right gender, or maybe they don't live in the right postcode, or might not have attended the right school. And because they don't sound or look the part, they will never get access to the feedback, networks, and capital they need to start up and scale up their businesses. Talent is distributed evenly, but opportunity is not. FounderTribes exists to change that. Our mobile app uses machine learning to match founders with the investors, mentors, and educational support that they need. We're like Tinder, but for founders. It all begins with a founder submitting a pitch that will be evaluated by a community of entrepreneurs and investors relevant to their vertical and stage. Each founder gets qualified feedback about the weakest areas of their business plan, as articulated in their pitch. They are evaluated according to the 10 elements of a business plan as per Sequoia Capital's evaluation system. There are two possible outcomes. If a founder is deemed investable, they will automatically be matched with investors appropriate for their stage and vertical. A founder can also choose to see investors who have made the hire or set the wire in the past, meaning investors with a track record of investing in or hiring people of backgrounds similar to the founders. If a founder is not deemed investable, they will be offered a personalized selection of video tips from world-class founders relating to their areas of weakness. They will also be matched with expert mentors to work through their risk factors. When the founder is finally deemed investable by their mentor and the community, they will then be introduced to the relevant investors for them with an optimized chance of success. Our database includes 18,000 angels, 3,000 venture capitalists, and 5,000 mentors. Our world-class content comes from such gurus as Stacey Abrams, Steve Blank, Jen Wong, and Anne Wojcicki. We have distribution deals on 4 continents, including with the City of New York, London and Partners, Silicon Valley Bank, Capital Enterprise, and Unicaf. We have also raised $1.2 million from British investors such as Velocity Capital Advisors and Chris Topman, and American unicorn founders such as Sandra Daniels, the founder of Thumbtack, which has raised $436 million from Sequoia Capital and Google, Zach Bookman, the founder of OpenGov, who has raised $140 million from investors including Andreessen Horowitz, and Dana Wagner, Chief Legal Officer at Impossible Foods, which has raised $1.5 billion from investors including Serena Williams, Katy Perry, and Jay-Z. If software is eating the world, it's time for the startup ecosystem itself to be disrupted. It's no longer acceptable to relegate and ignore 99.9% of founders. FounderTribes uses machine learning to empower millions of entrepreneurs around the world, regardless of what they look like or where they come from. We hope that you will join us. Please download the app today.
All right. So I think I've used up most of my time, probably more than I have. So just quickly, the next steps. Remember, if you know of an entrepreneur or you're an entrepreneur yourself, download the app. Remember, it's still in the beta version. Please feel free to suggest any changes or things that you think that we need to improve. Next week, we'll send everyone who registered 1 month of a free subscription, so you'll be able to use it for free, as well as a new version that we think that will be even more optimized. And again, just recommend it to anyone that you think that might be able to find value, that's an entrepreneur and feels a little bit alone and they need a little bit of support. And with that, I think I now want to turn it over to our illustrious panel. Like I said, we wouldn't be here today if we didn't have some of these amazing partners like Silicon Valley Bank or the Association for Enterprise Opportunity or Howard Law School. So I'm going to turn it over first to Connie to give us a little bit of an introduction as to AEO, what they do. And I'll turn it over to Connie.
Thank you, Gary. And good afternoon, good evening to everyone. Every time I see that video, I get so excited. It is just wonderful. It's wonderful to see the iteration is now out there and waiting for all of our listeners to download it. I am Connie Evans. I am the president and CEO of the Association for Enterprise Opportunity, AEO. We are a national trade association for U.S. microfinance and microbusiness. We have over 2,600 organizations around the country who provide capital and business support services to underserved entrepreneurs. We are 100% focused on changing the way capital and services flow to underserved entrepreneurs and aspiring entrepreneurs. And we're just really very proud to be partners with Gary and to be amongst this incredible panel.
Thank you so much, Connie. I think now we're going to turn it over to Vanessa from Silicon Valley Bank.
Yes. Hi, everyone. Super excited to be here today. So I'll give a little bit of background about myself and SVB in general. So I've been with Silicon Valley Bank for about 3 years. And so in my role as VP of New and Strategic Channels, I focus on helping founders grow and scale to institutional Series A raise. So working with founders pre-Series A, but SVB works with founders from the seed stage up until and past actually IPO. So we're the bank for entrepreneurs. We bank about 60% of all venture-backed technology companies and many of the VCs as well. So I really like to think of us as sitting at the epicenter of the innovation economy. And so we're here to support founders, entrepreneurs, or anyone thinking, that may be the step or the next direction that they want to take.
Awesome. And last but not least, one of my oldest, by which I mean kind of friends that I've known the longest since I was about 17 years old, Danielle Holly, my co-founder as well of the Yale Black Political Forum, which we did as undergrads.
Thank you so much, Gary. I am just thrilled to be here tonight and to see Howard University School of Law partner with FounderTribes, an app that I believe in so much because I am the head of a law school that is about 95% people of African descent and 70% women. And we know that even in traditional fields like law, the future is in entrepreneurship. And we know that what most people are seeking, even when they're getting very traditional degrees like law or medicine, is the ability to grow their wealth, grow generational wealth, and really make sure that they are taking care of themselves and their families. And we know that entrepreneurship is the key. And for entrepreneurs to really enter into these spaces, they need support, like the support that we see with FounderTribes. And so I'm really excited that Howard University School of Law has been able to partner with Gary and with FounderTribes. He reminded me when he started this venture that we were entrepreneurs together. We did a startup together in college that was called the Yale Black Political Forum. And it's that spirit of entrepreneurship that Gary has had for the last, I won't say how many years because we look younger than we actually are. So I'm not going to say how many years, but for a very long time, he has had that entrepreneurial spirit. And it is incredible to see a business like FounderTribes really support intergenerational wealth for people of color and specifically for people of African descent. And really, when you hear those statistics, that this is the majority of people around the world who are starting businesses with very little to no support, FounderTribes really fills that gap. And so we are honored as Howard University School of Law to be a partner. And so I want to invite our last panelist, Eleanor Brown, distinguished law professor, to join us, and distinguished law professor and entrepreneur, to join us on the panel. Eleanor, why don't you take a minute to introduce yourself? It is such a thrill to be here with you this evening.
Thank you very much. I am delighted to be here. So delighted about FounderTribes. I'll say more about that later. And you know, I'm a law professor, so I have to start by giving a little bit of context. Danielle is very modest, but if you Google her name, you will see that her name is being mentioned as a possible Supreme Court nominee. So first I want to say I'm honored to be here generally, but particularly in Danielle's presence. And then the other thing I want to say is that it is really not possible to think about the advances for any group, Black people, but not just Black people, women, LGBTQ plus people, without thinking of Howard University Law School. It is the school that has done more than any other institution to advance civil rights in the country. Daniel is following in the footsteps of people like Thurgood Marshall. I'm a property rights scholar. The whole range of opportunities with respect to property that Black people now have that they didn't have historically only happened because of people like Thurgood Marshall. So I have to begin by saying that. I'm a property professor at Penn State. I study asset acquisition, how it is that some people are able to acquire assets and do so very well and others are not, and what are the institutional barriers. So I have an academic interest in this area. The other hat I wear is that I'm an entrepreneur. I founded a company called Diversity Board, which a little bit of background, we're in central Pennsylvania. It's a mini Silicon Valley, quite close to Carnegie Mellon, lots of tech companies. People are looking for diverse technical talent. My native Caribbean produces extraordinary software engineering candidates, and we match people, international diverse people, to software opportunities wherever they are. So that's what we do. Thank you.
This is going to be a fantastic panel. We're going to have some questions to start us off, and then I'll invite the other panelists to really join the conversation. I want to start with Connie, and just to give us some background, we know that AEO does research that shows that entrepreneurship can decrease the wealth gap that we see between people of Caucasian descent and people of color. Would you explain what the wealth gap is and why it is relevant to entrepreneurship, and why entrepreneurship is such a key means of reducing the wealth gap?
Certainly, Danielle. And again, it's an honor to be on this platform with you and your potential nomination. So it's quite exciting.
It's not a potential nominee. I just want to calm everyone down about that. I was just mentioned in a few articles, which I'm very grateful for, but there's going to be an outstanding nominee in the next couple of weeks. And yes, but thank you.
You're very welcome. Well, the wealth gap is a serious issue, as we all know. And to give you a sense of that, and I'm going to give you statistics from AEO's research entitled The Tapestry of Black Business Ownership in America. And what we've learned about the wealth gap is that on average, white adults hold 13 times more wealth than Black family adults. When we compare the median wealth of Black and white business owners, however, that median wealth gap decreases to a multiplier of 3. Now just think about that for a second. 13% gap, but once you bring in and compare Black business owners and white business owners, that gap closes down to 3%. So we have to recognize that to be able to build wealth, business ownership needs definitely to be in the mix, very highly prioritized to actually do that. But it goes further. even when we are just looking at Black business owners versus their peers who are not business owners, we find that Black business owners hold 12 times more wealth than their peers who are not business owners, meaning other Blacks who don't own a business. We also found in our research that your wealth is built quicker and stays with you longer when it's wealth coming from business ownership versus wealth that comes from wage employment. So, whether you're looking at it from how do we narrow the wealth gap, how do we just begin to create intergenerational wealth, how do we begin to build solid assets, business ownership must be considered among one of the most important strategies for our community, our global community, to really hold and address. We want to narrow the wealth gap. We have to support business ownership. And it's not only just starting businesses, as Gary spoke to in his presentation. Actually, Blacks start more businesses than any other ethnic group or segment. They just die quicker. We die on the vine much, much quicker. We're not given the kind of runway and the support to actually get those businesses to take off. But trust me, it is the main strategy for business, for Blacks to own their own businesses. And it takes all of us to keep those businesses going strong so we can grow those assets and grow intergenerational wealth.
That's really, really important information. Vanessa, to add to this, talk to us about the role of the banking industry in terms of creating entrepreneurship, people starting up, and then being able to sustain really successful businesses. So we know that 44% of Black business owners use their own cash to start their venture, and Black business owners receive less business financing less often and at higher interest rates. So 37.9% of Black business owners say they are discouraged from applying for loans. And their experience with the PPP program, the Payback Protection Program, where $734 billion in forgivable loans was meant to be given to struggling small businesses, but minority-led businesses without connections or advisors did not get the help that PPP really was out there to give. So what do banks like Silicon Valley Bank do to improve this relationship between Black entrepreneurs and other entrepreneurs of color, women as entrepreneurs, as Gary talked about, people who are white but have not traditionally had wealth in their families? What does Silicon Valley do to encourage entrepreneurship among people who are not traditionally successful in terms of starting up and sustaining successful businesses?
Absolutely. And I want to just start by acknowledging that banks are at the epicenter of all of this. So as it relates to the founders getting loans, but there's a lot more pieces that I think, don't often get acknowledged. It's also the funders. So who are the VCs that we have out in market? Gary mentioned that, over 40% of all VCs come from a handful of schools together. And so at SVB, there are the few things that we do, but I think it's really also just about access to information. The one thing that pains my heart is when I see founders using their own personal credit or personal banking information to open up a business account. So at SVB, you can open up a business account. It's not tied to your personal credit score at all. We understand that majority of founders are already using their personal funds and bootstrapping, and that already is taking a huge effect on their personal finances. And so we're not going to then involve that as it relates to the banking on the business side. So number one takeaway, if from anything I say tonight, do not use your personal credit score to open a business bank account. You don't need to, and there's many options. But then I think there's so many nuances of starting operational costs that are required to start a business that a lot of other communities may be able to lean on what we so call friends and family. And so that's where you hear the infamous now friends and family round. And so I know personally, if I was starting a entrepreneurial endeavor today, I wouldn't be able to secure a seed round, which is around 200K and below, of funding from my friends and family. And so for those of us who don't have that, the question now is, who can we turn to? And I will be the first one to say banks have not done a good job at this for seed stage entrepreneurs. So, post Series A, once there's institutional funding, there's a lot of options. Once you have that signed term sheet, I guarantee you'll hear from the bankers. We'll be calling you to say, hey, here are these options about extending that capital. Now, what we've heard from the entrepreneurs is where they need the capital the most is at the seed stage. So to prove that their idea is worth investing in. And so honestly, at SVB right now, that's not a product that we currently have, but that's something we're looking into building out to how we can best support, entrepreneurs who are at that stage. And I'm going to go ahead and share in the chat a few of the alternative lenders that we work with who do financing at the seed stage. And so I just dropped that in the chat. We work closely with Lighter Capital, Vendor Term, Claire Bank. Honestly, these are great solutions, especially for those startups who are in the consumer sector or in sectors where there's heavy accounts payable. Or if your business has a SaaS model as well, there's options out there, but just I think within the banking community, this is something we're aware of, something we're looking into seeing how we can best support founders at these stages. But I will be honest, I don't think there's a good solution out there right now.
That's great. And I think that's why FounderTribes is so important, right? That it really allows you to build community when you may not have found any community yet, including a banking partner. It allows you to really have a place to go find community. But those are really important resources that you put in the chat. Professor Brown, I have to turn to you next. You also are very modest. You talk about me being modest, but you are very modest. Professor Brown is a Rhodes Scholar and an incredibly successful and admired law professor. And even with your resume as it is, you decided to become an entrepreneur. So tell us a little bit about why did you choose to become an entrepreneur? And what are some of the key barriers and successes that you've had as you've been in the stage of starting a successful business venture?
Thank you, Daniel. Very kind of you. Dean Holly Walker, I should say. Forgive me, I will move between first names and last names.
Danielle is great.
So the first thing that I want to see, which ties into what Connie said and what Vanessa says, and then I promise I'm going to answer your question, is the key difficulty that people of color generally and Black people in particular have had is that an overwhelming number of American businesses get their initial capital to start their business from their house. So they take a line of credit against equity in their house. Forgive me for being a little bit of a law professor, but this is why it is important that you own a formal home, that you are able to get a mortgage, that you're able to get a line of credit. Historically, there were major barriers to Black people in particular getting that, to property ownership, and there was state subsidized discrimination that gave white people subsidized access to mortgage lines and property subsidies, which Black people did not have. So the historical problem we're dealing with, it is an institutional problem, is a one of not owning property because governments were discriminatory and did not give the same subsidies. Going beyond World War II. This is in the lifetimes of our parents and grandparents. So the important thing that Gary is doing and FounderTribes is doing is looking at those institutional barriers and saying we are coming up with technology-based mechanisms of reducing those barriers. So that's the first thing I wanted to see. Now, the reason that I was so motivated to start what I've started is I have talked about previous iterations of wealth creation, how people of color were excluded, how Black people were excluded, and how we're seeing today, decades later, the implications of that intergenerationally for wealth creation. We are seeing the same problem being replicated again, because in our lifetimes, the greatest place for the creation of value has been Silicon Valley, has been technology. Maybe also finance, we can have a debate about that, but let's talk about Silicon Valley. To the extent that this is coming from white bros, forgive me for being so blunt, I put it in quotation marks, who have gone to particular schools, who have a group of friends, who come up with particular technologies, are able to do their financing rounds from friends and family. If we do not have people of color in that space, it is having implications not just for other things that are important, like representation matters, which I believe is very important, but for the actual creation of wealth. It means we're seeing an extraordinary creation of wealth, and because Black technology people are not there, it is going to have implications. Now, I saw one of the benefits of having come to Pennsylvania and central Pennsylvania and kind of being in this area, this Pittsburgh area, where there's a lot of technology happening, is I have seen that in real time. Now, the problem is domestic in that there are many Black trained engineers, including Black women, who do not have access to these networks. The problem is also international in that there are places like my region of the world, the Caribbean, which are creating incredible talent and who do not have access to. So this is why I did what I did. So that's my motivation. In terms of impediments, I would say the greatest impediment is the ability to get into the room with the people to raise the money that needs to be raised. And I find that any person of color I've had a conversation with, particularly Black people, particularly Black women, that is the impediment. Now, what we need to do is to leverage what we have to get into those rooms. So Danielle said this. I was a little embarrassed when she said this, but it matters that I went to Yale Law School. It matters that I was a Rhodes Scholar. It matters that I was a fellow at Harvard, because it gets me into those rooms. That's the greatest impediment. Once you raise that seed round, then you can, access the type of financing that Vanessa so discussed, but you got to be able to raise that seed round, and that's the greatest impediment. I now want to refer back to something Connie said, which I think is very important. Connie is 100% correct that the 13 times disparity becomes a 3 or 4 times disparity when you compare white business owners to Black business owners. I'm 100% with that. One of the disparities, though, is formalization. And this is why what Vanessa said about not using your personal credit and really setting up a proper business and setting up a proper business credit line in the name of your business is so important. Because one of the reasons that Black folks get left behind is they're less inclined to formalize. And formalization is important for maximizing the value that you get out of your property rights generally and out of your business in particular. So I wanted to say that in response to what Connie said. Thank you very much.
That's such an important point. And it's something that we can do with our law students.
Yes.
Is help them to be educated to help formalize these businesses on behalf of entrepreneurs. And so I love that point. Connie, let's go back to you and talk about this notion of the unicorn and the idea that most of the time venture capital, banking, government interest is focused on accelerating the growth of so-called tech unicorns. And this is a little bit about what Eleanor was talking about this concentration in Silicon Valley and a few other places in the United States of really people creating tech startups. But we know that 92% of all businesses are really micro businesses in which the owner entrepreneur may be the solo employee. So what should we be doing to accelerate the growth of these micro businesses and these solopreneurs so that we can build stronger, more resilient communities instead of thinking of every startup as Meta/Facebook or as Amazon or as Microsoft? And I love the fact that you pointed out many times that many of the people we think of as self-made actually did have their seed round from a loan from their parents or money that was given to them by friends and family. So how can we really help the solopreneurs and the people who won't be the unicorn tech startup, but they do have, as Gary's video showed, their own barbershop in Pittsburgh, or, a business that they've started to sell their art. So much smaller micro businesses.
It's a great question, Danielle. And I want to start my answer by actually going back to Vanessa. Vanessa, I appreciated your comment so much because you came out up front and said, banks aren't doing the greatest job out here to match the needs for capital. Again, another report from our research talks about that, there's a real market failure for Main Street. On Main Street, every single day, 8,000 businesses are declined for small business loans of $250,000 and below. Not 8,000 a year, a month, 8,000 declines per day from traditional banks. That is really a market failure on Main Street. It's valued, we've estimated the value working along with our partners, IBM and Dun & Bradstreet. We did a study to size the market, size that gap. It's about a $55 billion gap on the market. And we estimate about $9 billion of that is what's being declined, if you will, and that gap for Black-owned businesses. So I just wanted to acknowledge that Vanessa was awesome in talking about that and raising it up front, because we do have to look at alternatives than the traditional banks. But to move forward in answering your question also, I just would want to point out that, Black-owned, we can make some changes in Black-owned businesses, and it doesn't sound to us like it's a huge leap. For example, as you mentioned, the overwhelming majority of businesses in this country, not the overwhelming majority of small business, the overwhelming majority, over 90-some% of businesses in this country are micro, meaning 5 or fewer employees. Only 4% of Black-owned businesses are employer firms. So 96% are sole proprietors. Now they might use consultants, and they're helping to create some other jobs and other revenue, but they are not at parity. Black-owned businesses are not at parity in terms of employment as their white overall businesses. If we think about the simple kind of equation that our research shows is possible, if we take 15% of sole proprietors, not all of them, just 15% of sole proprietors, and they hire one person, each of the 15%, and then you take out of that 4% of employer firms, and they reach employer parity by going from 9 to 11 employees, meaning they hire 2, we would actually be able to create over 600,000 new businesses. Wow. And overwhelmingly, Black-owned businesses tend to hire Black employees. And so if we are able to bring the strategies of matching the kind of financial support, bringing policies like government contracting and things like that, bringing the support that these businesses need, just think how simple it should be to help only 15% add 1 employee and that 4% add 2 employees to really be able to move the bar in terms of Black-owned businesses. We think it's doable. It just takes everybody to come together, work together toward a very focused strategy to make that happen.
That's great information. So informative. Vanessa, same kind of take on the same question.
Yeah.
What can banks do to support, that, group of businesses, huge number of businesses, 96%, I think Connie said, of Black businesses that are solopreneurs? What can banks do to really move that 96% to 1 employee? If we take another, just 15% of those and want to move them to 1 employee, another percentage and add them to 2 employees, what is the role of a bank like Silicon Valley Bank or other banks in helping to support those micro businesses and solopreneurs?
Yeah, the role of the banks is extremely large. And I think with all of the data in the reports, I'm really excited because I feel like as it relates to this topic, it's become so data centered lately, and there's been a ton of great research out there. And so banks are being held accountable to just how much they contribute as it relates to lending capital. At SVB specifically, we focus on tech-enabled and life science businesses. Now, with that being said, I think the first step that all bankers can take, or anyone at any fiduciary institution, is really just to be honest with people. And so I work with hundreds of founders, and SVB particularly, we focus on venture debt. We have our private bank and a whole other suite of resources, but our main focus has been venture debt. And so if a founder raises a $5 million A, we may do $1 million of institutional debt. Now, when I speak to a founder and they're talking to me through their business model, I can sometimes identify that this may not be a business model that's suitable or right for venture capital. Now, when I say that, that's okay. Not every business is meant to raise VC dollars, and that's absolutely okay. And VC is not the only way to succeed. There's angel investing, there's crowd fundraising. And I think as the banker, you're able to see what businesses and the repetition and the patterns, what work with different types of funding models. And I think you need to be honest with the entrepreneurs about where their business model lies relative to what we're seeing out in market. And I think there's been this sentiment that if you don't raise traditional VC, it's a failure. And I think that we need to change the narrative and say, no, we know there's tons of funding out there. We just want you to do what's best for your business and your business model. And that doesn't always mean VC. So I think as banks, we need to look at how we're educating our customers and our consumer base as well, and pointing them in the right direction and right resources. As I said, SVB, we don't yet have a seed lending strategy. And so we know, though, so many of the entrepreneurs that are coming to us and looking for help and looking for guidance are going to be asking that question. We need to make sure that there's a solution available for them. If it's not us, who are the partners that we're working with? How are we telling them why what they're doing is important and supporting them as well?
That's great.
Vanessa, can I just jump in to follow up?
Yeah.
I want to, because I keep going back to Vanessa. I want to follow up and do something that she did, but just mention another alternative source. You're right. Not every business is going to fit in that model. And so part of our industry are the community development financial institutions that get called CDFIs. But these are mission-based lenders who are across the country, who are available to provide capital for some of these businesses. And so I just wanted to mention that that's another alternative. Know that although we do have CDFI that are venture funds, the majority of them are just revolving loan funds that an entrepreneur can go to for capital. And it's not always a micro. A micro loan might be technically $50,000 and below. We talk about microfinance as $250,000 and below, but some of our members actually make loans up to $1 million or more. So I want to make sure that our audience understands that there really is a variety of alternatives to go to in terms of thinking about where they access capital.
That's great information. I want to remind our audience that you'll have an opportunity in a few minutes to ask questions. So I think you have an ability to put into the chat or to the comments your questions, and we'll get to those in just a little bit. I want to turn back to Professor Brown and ask you about one argument that we always hear is that when we talk about these statistics, kind of differences in terms of how businesses that are funded by people who are white, who are from certain schools, how they get a lot more funding than the businesses that are maybe owned by women or people of color. And many times the explanation is there's just not a talent pipeline. we can't have equal funding of businesses when the talent's not equal. And a lot of times that's the argument, is that there's just, so when you were talking about engineers, the engineers who support these tech startups, there's not that kind of talent in the pool for women and people of color. What do you say to those arguments that this is really a pipeline issue and not an issue of inequity?
Okay, thank you so much for that question, Dean Holly Walker. I'm going to answer the question. I just have one very quick thing to say in response to what Connie and Vanessa said. Connie, you're absolutely right to talk about the CDFIs. Overwhelmingly, people will find it much easier to access a CDFI than to access an entity like SVB. Of course, what SVB is doing is very important. And I thank Vanessa for highlighting other sources other than VCs. But I also want to say that we need Black businesses to scale. That's what was so amazing about what you said, Connie, where you talked about 2 becoming 4 and 4 becoming 8, and what is that's an extraordinary thing that you just said, because it is in the scaling that you get the wealth amplification and the intergenerational wealth going from parents to children and the broader implications for the community. So we want to reach smaller people and simultaneously have a subset that scale. I just wanted to make that point. Okay, so I want to point out that elites everywhere, in every type of institution, institute barriers to entry for new people coming in. It is the story of history. You know, my favorite new show on HBO is The Gilded Age. Age, which has an extraordinary line about Black elite in New York City. It's really very interesting. But The Gilded Age is about old-fashioned blue blood money not wanting newer money to come in. So that is the human experience. Now, the reason that I say that is whenever you hear people saying the reason it's only us and there are not other people is because those other people are not good enough to be us, you should institutionally be skeptical about that. Because as Gary said at the beginning, talent is everywhere, opportunity is not. Now, because of the history of segregation in this country and because the people who have been educated historically who were Black were historically disproportionately likely to go to elite historically Black colleges. And notice I underline the word elite because they were elite colleges and are elite colleges, but they were not people who were being schooled side by side. And so it means in the process of production of elites, white elites did not get to know elites from other groups, right? And of course, the utilization of the word elite is in and of itself a problem because the opportunity is much broader than that. But I'm saying that it tells you how bad it is that they were not even able to look beyond white elites, the Black elites, the Hispanic elites. So I'm telling you that you must always be skeptical when you hear that. So the issue is not one of people not being produced who have the skill set. The issue is one of lazy elitism, of people not being willing to look beyond who they know in their circle when they simply need to pick up the telephone and say, where are the engineering schools that are producing lots of Black engineers? And if you pick up the telephone and make those calls, you will immediately find the people. One of the benefits of being a Black professor at a large state university is I find I can pick up the telephone and call Black people who are academics anywhere and they'll take my call. And I always wonder to myself, because they'll take calls from anyone, why would these people not make those same set of telephone calls? And so I am very strongly pushing back on the notion, because we're time constrained, I'm not going to give numbers, on the notion that the talent is not there. The talent is there. It is about your comfort level in looking for the talent. You know, one of the things that I've learned from being involved with the Rhodes Scholarship and interviewing, etc., is a place like the University of Maryland, Baltimore. That place produces an extraordinary number of Black scientists.
Yes.
Xavier University. Nearly half of the doctors in the South come from Xavier University. So the point, I'm utilizing those that to say that if you didn't do the work, you wouldn't know that University of Maryland, Baltimore is producing this level of excellence, that Xavier is producing this level of excellence. And the skill sets are transferable. So you will get people who are already trained as software engineers, but you'll also get people who are quant jocks. They have done math, they have done physics, they have done econometrics. They have a skill set that is transferable. And they're very easily trained into the type of skills you're looking for. So we're being way too narrow about it. And I would have focused on race, but I would say the same thing about gender. I would say the same thing about women's colleges. I would say the same thing about places where you disproportionately find Hispanic people, etc. So I hope I've answered your question.
Absolutely. And I think of places when you said that, like Spelman College, that Black Women's College produces the most PhDs in STEM, Black women, PhDs in STEM. So if you're a group that says, okay, we want to fund more businesses or go find those engineers, you know where to go. I think that's the incredible thing about this country, having this group of historically Black colleges and universities that really produce. Howard has an engineering and computer science and architecture school. You can go to North Carolina A&T and find all of these incredible engineers. And that's one of the most special things about our country, is that we have this vast talent pool through the minority serving institutions that provide a built-in pipeline for anyone who's really interested. So I want to come to this moment, Connie, and talking about what's happened since the summer of 2020. So in the summer of 2020, we had this watershed moment through the Black Lives Matter movement after George Floyd was killed in Minneapolis. We saw corporations, banks, everyone created all these racial justice funds, $50 billion committed to Black businesses. Only $250 million has actually been allocated. And so I think one question I'd like the panel to answer is, have things really changed since the summer of 2020 for Black entrepreneurs, other entrepreneurs of color? Have you seen any movement? And if not, why not? Was this just kind of, window dressing, virtue signaling, or are there other barriers to Black entrepreneurs and other entrepreneurs of color being able to take advantage of these newly committed racial justice funds?
Again, another great question. And I don't want to make my answer sound so simplistic to say, well, the corporations, just didn't step up far enough to meet those commitments, because I think it's a mixed bag. What we've been able to do as AEO is work with amazing partners, corporate partners who have stepped up. PayPal, for example, was one of the first that reached out to us, is a strong partner, and has really helped Black-owned businesses. Fiserv is another one. But rather than going down the list of our partners, what I want to say, AEO has worked with corporate partners to administer or distribute over $300 million in grants to Black-owned businesses since May of 2020. We recently were able to do a survey on a significant number that have been grant awardees over a year. And what we found with just a grant of $10,000, which sounds pretty simple and relatively low, but what we found from that is that nearly 99% of the businesses who receive grants are still operating. And they clearly say, if it were not for that grant from a PayPal, from a Fiserv, from on and on about our partners, they would not have survived. I tell you, when we read what these surveys come back with, it will bring tears to your eyes to hear the resilience, one, of our businesses in this community, but also to hear how even small amounts of grants, not capital, not credit, but grants were able to help them along with business support. I think those corporations who haven't activated on their commitments don't actually know how to do that. There is such a gap in their understanding of what Main Street businesses need and the Black-owned businesses need, that they get shocked. They don't know how to move into communities. They don't have the right relationships in the community. They don't have the relationships with our member organizations. Like I said, we have almost 2,700 members out there. who could help them navigate and bring those networks together, to bring the capital, to bring services, to bring contracts and marketing, all the kinds of assets that they actually could put in the community. There are members of the community who reach that community, who are trusted by the community, and many of those corporate partners just don't have that reach. I want to invite them to pick up the phone, email us, reach us, because there are networks out there in the ecosystem. There are ecosystem builders who can help them navigate in the communities and make sure that how they present is actually going to be effective and have the impact and the reach of the money to who needs it the most.
Love that. Encourage any businesses that are, any funders that are on this call to reach out to Connie, reach out to Gary through FounderTribes, reach out to historically Black colleges and universities and MSIs like Howard and others who may be able to help you make those connections. Vanessa, same, and I'll ask everybody to just go 2 to 3 minutes on this since we're headed into questions. If you have a question, please drop it in the comments now so we can take those in just a second. Vanessa, have you seen any change in banks since the summer of 2020?
I've seen a lot of changes internally. I think there is a conversation among all financial institutions to be really intentional about this work. If they don't, put it into their business plan, if they don't have a team assessing the goals, they don't have KPIs, it's not just going to magically get better overnight. The funding they're providing to Black founders isn't just going to increase. So I've seen a lot of intentionality, which I'm really excited about. But then I'm also extremely excited about there's a ton of emerging managers out there that look like all of us. And so these are the people that are making those funding decisions. However, they still need to raise too. It's not easy to raise a fund. So we need as many Black LPs as possible to fund these emerging managers. But that's one thing I'm really excited about. And in general, I think there is a lot of intentionality around, okay, for banking and for banks specifically, what can we do? What programs can we put in place? Because we realize it can't be a passive solution. We have to be really intentional.
That's good to know. That's good to know. Professor Brown, I'll let you have the last word in this part of our panel. Talk to me a little bit about any changes that you've seen as an entrepreneur, as a founder. Have you seen any changes since the summer of 2020? And what's your best piece of advice, considering the context of this moment, to anyone who is watching us tonight that is an entrepreneur, may want to start their own business, is thinking about scaling their business? What changes have you seen and what advice would you give?
Okay, so thank you very much, Dean Holly Walker. So the first thing that I want to say is we need to acknowledge that some of this has been vertiginary. I think we got to acknowledge that. Having said that, there is no question that there are people who have funds who are well-intentioned in their inclination to utilize the funds as they have said they would. I would then say that what does not get measured does not get done. And so we need a public accountability mechanism in which when persons say, this is what I am going to do, you can then say, I have 100 million, 25 million is being given away in year one, 25 million in year two, 25 million. At the end of year one, you say, how much did you give? Through who? Who did you reach out to as your intermediary? Because what Connie is speaking about is intermediary organizations like our own that then serve as conduits to much broader groups of people. That is clearly the solution to the distribution problem, because part of what we're talking about here is a distribution problem. Now, I like the fact that Connie said, call me, because what Connie is doing in saying calling me is holding people accountable and saying you cannot say you do not know how to give away the money, because here are all of these community development financing institutions, many of whom are member organizations of my entity, and I can reach them. Call me. So the message out of this conversation would be, here are your intermediaries. This is what you can do. Do what PayPal has done. Okay, so I would say that. Now, I think the best advice that I can give people is, because I think the money is there. If we find a mechanism to hold people accountable to do what they said they were going to do, which is part of what Vanessa is saying, people who are entrepreneurs should be able to find the money. So we are having a mismatch, a gap between the money, the people who need the money, the distribution in the middle. So we need the database of entities like Connie's and her membership organizations. It's a pity that we don't have this right here, to provide to people so they can say, this is my zip code, who's in my zip code, who's giving out money. That is what I would tell you to do right now. And I would also say that when you are approaching people, you need to put in the sentence line of the email, I am an underrepresented founder. Do not be unambiguous about it. Do not apologize for it. Make it clear from point one. Because what you're signaling to people is that the funds you said you were giving away are for people like me, and I'm telling you that on day one. So that would be a piece of advice I would give.
That's wonderful advice. Don't hide your light under a bushel. Let people know that you're a member of the group that they pledged to assist. I'm going to invite Gary back to the stage, and we have some great questions that I want to pose to the panel in these last few minutes. I'll start and I'll let Gary do the next one. We have a question that says, it seems that tech companies will typically receive funding versus another field of business such as retail. Is this true? Does anyone want to take that? Is tech most likely to really get VC funding, or is that a myth?
Could I say something about that, Danielle?
Yes.
Okay. So I like the point Vanessa made earlier about VC. The key issue for people who are VC investors is they want scale. For them to get the returns, what gives them the returns is scale. Okay. Now, the brilliance of technology is that it has figured out ways to make many aspects of life that were previously not easily scalable. And that is what has given technology the disproportionate focus. But having said that, one of my concerns is the things that Black people have historically done. It's always amazing to me when I'm invited to these competitions to judge, to speak, etc. There are always these amazing number of Black women who, have hair care products, have makeup products, have, which are very, very necessary businesses. And so I think part of the gap, and this goes to what Connie said, is we need to tell the people who are funding that part of what you're funding is the daily businesses of life that people are involved in. Gary circulated some numbers which said Black businesses are disproportionately likely to be in healthcare. He's absolutely right. You follow what I'm saying? People have nurses' aids, companies that do nurses' aids, that sort of a thing. Jamaican, lots of Jamaicans with nurses' aids companies. We need to be funding those as well. So I'm highlighting why tech is getting the emphasis and simultaneously saying that's problematic. Because Main Street, we're having a Main Street problem. Main Street is having the problem getting funded.
Absolutely. And one thing I'll add on to that is when VCs are making investments into companies, they're expecting one company to 6x the fund. So VC isn't, I wish it was a game where everyone in the fund is winning. So when they're looking at your company, they're saying, is this a company that's going to be able to return the entire fund if everything else fails? And some business models and sectors just aren't suited to scale that quickly. However, though, one thing I always give and advise founders is knowing this, when someone is willing to invest in you, that is a signal that they expect your company to make them really, really rich. Just like these investors are making you go through diligence and qualifying you, you qualify them as well and make sure that the people on your cap table are communities and people that you would want to grow personal wealth with as well. So that's just something to think about.
Yeah, and even though I'm not on the panel, I mean, I've just thrown out some numbers. It's something like 0.05% of companies in the US get venture capital funding. So 99.95% of companies do not get venture capital funding. 95% of the VC firms fail. So 95% of the VC firms actually do not return the 3x return that they want, which is the reason that everyone is really, really focused on finding the next Facebook, the next Google. Because if you invested in Airbnb, as let's say Andreessen Horowitz or Sequoia, you made $11 billion from that. That's a lot of money. The other thing that you have to realize is that venture capitalists don't invest their own money. They're investing someone else's money. That money usually tends to be rich institutions like Yale, or it tends to be rich people. And those rich people are basically saying, if I give you my money, you need to make more money than I can make it by putting it in the bank or by putting it in property. So it needs to be a very large return. And most VCs don't do that. So this is part of the reason why in FounderTribes we're saying, don't focus on VC. It's not going to happen for 99.95% of businesses. And the only companies that they're looking at is if you have any realistic potential of being $1 billion business. If you're not trying to create $1 billion business, do not go to VCs, right? And I think the other thing I was going to say, Eleanor, is when you said, wouldn't it be great if there was a way to kind of say, I'm a founder, what are the options in my zip code? That's exactly what FounderTribes is doing.
Exactly right.
That's exactly what we're trying to do. We're trying to say, you don't need to kiss 99 frogs to find one prince or princess. Just download the app and filter out all of the other ones. That's exactly what we need, so founders don't waste a lot of time. But with that, I want to go to another question from another one of our investors and also an entrepreneur I've known for a long time, Erica. Erica has asked a question. Since we have a panel of of all Black women, basically, no one's really spoken about the intersectionality point. What do you think about the intersectionality point, given that most Black women tend to be even less funded than Black men?
So could I say something on that? So what I'm going to say is going to be controversial, but I think people need to be thoughtful and strategic when they're looking for money. So in the Caribbean, in my native Caribbean, we have a phrase, it's really a transition, but we call it gray hair. And when you are young and female and Black, because of the history of who has money and who does not, you have a credibility gap. And I learned from a friend many years ago that often the way that you bridge that credibility gap is you bring in gray hair. And it's a controversial thing to say, because essentially what you're saying is you're legitimating your presence by bringing in somebody who is older and maybe white and maybe male to your pitch meetings. But I know people who have done it, and I know people who have done it successfully. So although it's controversial to say, and I recognize it's controversial to say, I want to tell people that may be something that they want to think about. I think intersectionality is huge, to use Kim Crenshaw's words. I think it's hard enough for people to make the jump when the person pitching to them is male. It is much even harder to make the jump when the person pitching to them is Black and female, right? And I think if you go in without that knowledge, you're being naive, right? So the question you need to think about before you go in is recognizing that gap. What am I doing to make it such that what I am saying to them is credible? Okay. So for example, very quickly, there's a group of Black women who have something, I think it's called Lip Bar. They were on Shark Tank. Shark Tank told them to close down the business. If you go into a meeting with a group of white men, you need to say to them, you don't wear lipstick. Let me tell you about people who know about lipstick and who buys lipstick. You need to, at the first minute, say, I am talking to you about something you do not know about. And you need to be unapologetic about that. Because if you do that, you reduce the asymmetry between the people who have the money and the people who are asking for money. So sometimes you need to step a little bit out of your comfort zone. That's essentially what I'm saying.
I absolutely love that. And one more quick thing I'll add is this is the importance of qualifying investors. Go onto their website, look and see, have they invested in any Black founders? Have they invested in any women at all? You could see their portfolio. So I know there's a lot of investors who may say, you know, I'm interested or I'm doing this, but you're able to go on Crunchbase, you're able to Google and see what they actually have done as well.
It's so funny.
I just would add really quickly. I'm sorry, Danielle.
No, go ahead.
I would just add very quickly. I don't have the answer yet, but that last part of like what can be done to ensure that we're included going forward. We recognize through our research something called the trust gap, and it's big. It is big for Black business owners, Black entrepreneurs, and institutions and others. And there are lots of reasons. But my point here, we are in the final stages of a 2-year study, research study, to better understand this trust gap that exists between Black entrepreneurs and kind of like everybody else out there, right? And hopefully we'll be bringing not only solutions, but behavioral design. The lead of our research department is a behavior economist. And so he's bringing design principles and design thought to, as we do the synthesis, we just have over 1,000 respondents of Black business owners to our survey and our research effort. So hopefully, maybe by late summer, we will actually have some great answers to that questions to put out to your audience.
I was going to say, I experienced the gray hair issue myself recently. Nordstrom now has a Black-owned business section. So I decided I wanted to buy my best friend for her birthday all presents that were from Black-owned businesses. I discovered that Good American, which I thought was a business that was owned and founded by Khloe Kardashian, is actually owned and founded by a Black woman. Yeah. And very quietly kept. But Khloe Kardashian is a part owner and the face of that company, which was founded and created by a Black woman. I think that's an example of what Professor Brown was saying, is that she may not have been able to bring that company to visibility and funding in the way that it has, but by connecting herself with, in this case, not a gray hair, but someone who has visibility and may have met the trust gap on selling things like retail clothing, she was able to get her company to be successful. So I'll pose this last question. I'll take this one from Warrington Seabury, who's one of my first-year students at Howard Law. He says he's interested in going into public interest law, which is not lucrative, but he also wants to build generational wealth. Where does one realistically start in terms of entrepreneurship? So if you've never started a business, you're here tonight to find out what would it take to be a successful entrepreneur, and you know that you won't have a lot of your own personal wealth to commit to it because he wants to be a public interest lawyer. What advice would the panel give about where to start if you want to become an entrepreneur?
I think a great first stab would be accelerators. I really love accelerators because they will put you through the steps that what you need to do for the timing of where you're at. But that brings it back to FounderTribes. I think the most important thing is having a community. So understanding what to do based off the sector you're in, the stage you're in. And so with FounderTribes, you could go and find and build that community for yourself specific to exactly what you're building. But, you know, first step, create the EIN, get that started. And then from there, I would say just keep thinking about what community you need to cultivate around you in order to be successful. So if you're thinking about going into a CPG business, what are the first few steps you should take for starting and building that out? That's going to look a little bit different than a traditional enterprise SaaS. And so the main and most important thing is that you have that tribe of people to tell you what's important and what's next for you as an entrepreneur.
That's great.
Could I also say, Warrington, I love your question, that one of the things that I try to teach my children, even at a young age, is a lot of white wealth is generated through 401ks and equities, the stock market. I am very much encouraging you in entrepreneurship, but I'm telling you to have a multi-tiered strategy. Make sure you have your 401k. That's a lot of wealth being generated there. Make sure that you have bought, even if you start small, maybe you start with a studio, then you move to a 1-bedroom. So make sure you're not putting all your eggs in one basket. You have a diverse strategy and you're doing many things at the same time. Not in any way discouraging your entrepreneurship. I'm just telling you to do the other things at the same time. That's me being a law professor talking to a law student.
And I would just add to do the market research, really come up with something. Don't just pick a business that, is in your neighborhood, or just something you even think and you want to bring, but really make sure there's a market. Again, most Black-owned businesses are in the lower revenue producing sectors and industries. And so actually kind of open your mind and be willing to maybe try something different, apply your skills to where there is a real market need and that you actually can have the capacity to fill those needs. I heard Professor Brown talk about transferable skills earlier. And so look where there are opportunities to maybe think about your skill sets and your assets a little bit more creatively and innovatively that matches some real market opportunity, and don't start the other cupcake shop where there are already, 50 cupcake shops in the same neighborhood, but really do that market research.
So sorry, I was going to ask Danielle if you can indulge me. I'll actually give up my closing time because it's my sister's on, so it's cool. And she asked,
Danielle, it's so good to see you.
I love that. I love this.
Yeah. So she asked a question: what should government be doing to kind of like level the playing field, whether it's in terms of grants or, in terms of Biden for a while was talking about venture capital funds as well, allocating like $7 billion to have venture capital focused specifically on Black and Brown communities. So what more do you think that government should do? And then Connie, there's one last question for you, which was, I think it was Brooke asked, she thought CDFIs or CFDIs, whatever, were only focused on real estate. Is that true? Or I told her no, because obviously what you were saying, but just wanted to confirm that. And then, the other question about what should government be doing? Because I guess at the end of the day, it's a lot of our taxpayer money that's being funneled into, and also the universities as well. Like, I love Yale, but $43 billion, who are the fund managers that they're choosing to invest that money? Are any of them people that look like the rest of us? So what do you think is the role of government and universities and corporates that are kind of giving pension money or public money or whatever the money is to these venture capitalists that don't look like the rest of us? How can we change that?
Well, AEO does have a public policy division, right? It's one of our portfolios. And so the Build Back Better bill has features in that bill that will support entrepreneurship. Our policy team, our lobbyist works very hard to make sure that those things were included. There are other programs, like we were very instrumental in getting the Minority Business Development Agency funded. We're still trying to make sure that it's permanent. So there are a number of things. And then there are other capital that's being put in. I mean, speaking of CDFIs, yes, they do not just do real estate. They fund small businesses, but they are different. So it's not like you can go to one and expect them all to be the same. But the Biden administration has invested an awful lot of money into CDFIs in this first term. So there's still more to do. It's procurement and all kinds of things in these bills. It's stuff in the infrastructure bill. It takes some digging if you're not familiar and if you're not a policy wonk following these things. But we should all be, because as you said, it's all of our taxpayers' money. But they really are doing some things, and we can continue to push them to do more. If your audience has ideas or questions on the policy, or they're working on policy issues and are looking for, to galvanize others, please reach out to AEO and our policy team to add our advocacy to your efforts.
So could I say something here? Thank you so much, Connie, for what you have said. A large part of what we have been discussing here is institutional challenges that are preventing funds from getting to people who are historically underrepresented. So there's a brilliant documentary that I just saw. I'm always looking for documentaries for my class, called The Power of the Fed. It's on Frontline. And it talks about the disparity between the funding of the Bank of Finance, Wall Street, and the money actually getting to Main Street. In a lot of what Connie and Vanessa have said, that has been the theme. The money is not getting even federal money to Main Street in a way that it can get to the funders. But there are other things that we can do, which I don't think that we are doing enough of. So for example, Danielle, Gary, and I are Yale alums. Gary talked about the fact that Yale has this huge endowment. It has endowment managers. We need, in the organizations that we belong to say to them that part of the way we are evaluating you is by whether or not you're being transparent in your reporting of how you invest your money as to where your money is going. Okay. Now, I don't have the information with me right now to say that the answer to that question is yes or no. I just don't know. But, Gary and I have benefited from, amazing stuff at Yale to help entrepreneurs do well. But we also need to be saying to Yale, tell us the answer to this question. And every one of us belongs to an organization where we can ask that question. And we need to ask. And we need to let people know that they need to be sharing that information. And we are going to hold them accountable on the basis of what they share. It was a previous administration. I won't get myself in any trouble, so I won't say what I really think. But it is criminal that PPP, taxpayer dollars, ended up disproportionately in the hands of the people who needed it the least. It is, I hate to utilize the word criminal, but it is. And part of what we need to do as citizens is make sure that things like that don't happen again. Again, I won't get myself in trouble. I won't say any more.
You're not going to say the T word? All right. All right, awesome. Well, I think that we've gone over time. I just want to say thank you guys. This has been like an amazing discussion. It's like 12:30 in London, but I feel like fully awake. I might even now be woke. Thank you to thank you to Danielle, aka Professor Holly Walker, for doing a brilliant job moderating, to Connie, Vanessa, and Professor Eleanor Brown for being brilliant panelists, to AEO, to Silicon Valley Bank, and to Howard for the support of FounderTribes. I think by way of recapping like the whole conversation, I would just say that anyone that thinks that there is a lack of Black talent, as Eleanor said, is just lazy. Like all you need to do is just like look on this platform, look at the people that are speaking here, the way that they know what they're talking about, the experiences that they've had, the credentials that they have as well. And it's just kind of crazy that people are saying, oh, we can't find talented Black people. They just don't know where to look. And we do know where to look. And I want to thank you guys for sharing all of your experience and insights with us. And to everyone else that's joined us, I think that we had pretty good turnout. Please remember, download the FounderTribes app. There's a lot of stuff that people have said today when Eleanor said, wouldn't it be great if we could just know what's available by zip code? I think wouldn't it be great if we knew by industry? Like, I mean, this is all FounderTribes is trying to do, and we just need your support and your help to kind of make us better. So thank you so much for your support. And thanks again to the wonderful panel. Oh, and the last thing I'll say, actually, I almost forgot, is that on the 17th of March, we're going to try and hold the next session, and we're focusing on calling something like manage your money like a wealth manager. I didn't even know there was something called wealth management until like my partner told me what it is, because that's what he works in. But there's basically like a whole division of like banks and stuff that basically helps people with lots of money, like $5 to $10 million, manage their money and figure out the best and most effective way of doing it. I just think that information should also be super transparent. Why shouldn't all of us basically be able to manage our income or whatever we have, our businesses, like wealth managers? So that's going to be the next session that we have. We're already lining up some people, hopefully from Silicon Valley Bank, from Goldman Sachs. So some of the big players in the banking industry that are really helping to advise billionaires, literally, to become even richer. So we want to get some of that same insight so that all of us can get a little richer too. So hopefully join us on the 17th of March. We'll send out the information. And thanks again for joining us. And thanks again to the brilliant panel.
Thank you for having us. It was wonderful.
Thank you.
Fabulous. Thanks. It was a delight.
We live in a world where 99.9% of the world's 600 million entrepreneurs are treated like roadkill. They might not be from the right race, or they might not be from the right gender, or maybe they don't live in the right postcode, or might not have attended the right school. And because they don't sound or look the part, they will never get access to the feedback, networks, and capital they need to start up and scale up their businesses. Talent is distributed evenly, but opportunity is not. FounderTribes exists to change that. Our mobile app uses machine learning to match founders with the investors, mentors, and educational support that they need. We're like Tinder, but for founders. It all begins with the founders submitting a pitch that will be evaluated by a community of entrepreneurs and investors relevant to their vertical and stage. Each founder gets qualified feedback about the weakest areas of their business plan, as articulated in their pitch. They are evaluated according to the 10 elements of a business plan as per Sequoia Capital's evaluation system. There are two possible outcomes. If a founder is deemed investable, they will automatically be matched with investors appropriate for their stage and vertical. A founder can also choose investors who have made the hire or set the wire in the past, meaning investors with a track record of investing in or hiring people of backgrounds similar to the founders. If a founder is not deemed investable, they will be offered a personalized selection of video tips from world-class founders relating to their areas of weakness. They will also be matched with expert mentors to work through their risk factors. When the founder is finally deemed investable by their mentor and the community, they will then be introduced to the relevant investors for them with an optimized chance of success. Our database includes 18,000 angels, 3,000 venture capitalists, and 5,000 mentors. Our world-class content comes from such gurus as Stacey Abrams, Steve Blank, Jen Wang, and Anne Wojcicki. We have distribution deals on 4 continents, including with the City of New York, London and Partners, Silicon Valley Bank, Capital Enterprise, and Unicaf. We have also raised $1.2 million from British investors such as Velocity Capital Advisors and Chris Topman, and American unicorn founders such as Sander Daniels, the founder of Thumbtack, which has raised $436 million from Sequoia Capital and Google, Zach Bookman, the founder of OpenGov, who has raised $140 million from investors including Andreessen Horowitz, and Dana Wagner, Chief Legal Officer at Impossible Foods, which has raised $1.5 billion from investors including Serena Williams, Katy Perry, and Jay-Z. If software is eating the world, it's time for the startup ecosystem itself to be disrupted. It's no longer acceptable to relegate and ignore 99.9% of founders. FounderTribes uses machine learning to empower millions of entrepreneurs around the world, regardless of what they look like or where they come from. We hope that you will join us. Please download the app today.